The claim sounds explosive. Prince William has pushed one of Queen Camilla's grandchildren out of Windsor, and Princess Anne supposedly watched the decision unfold without raising a single objection. It is exactly the kind of royal story designed to travel fast, because it contains everything the internet rewards an angry future king, an uneasy stepmother, a silent princess, a private residence, and a family member suddenly placed outside the palace gates. But once the dramatic language is separated from what can actually be established, the picture becomes far more complicated. There has been no confirmed palace announcement describing an expulsion, no publicly identified confrontation between William and one of Camilla's grandchildren, and no reliable evidence that Anne personally witnessed such a scene or approved it through silence. What does exist is a deeper and more believable royal question. Where does Queen Camilla's private family fit as the monarchy moves closer to the era that Prince William will eventually lead? That distinction matters because a rumor about one grandson can easily distract from the real institutional change taking place. Camilla has 2 children from her first marriage, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, and 5 biological grandchildren. They are members of the Queen's family, but they are not members of the royal family in the constitutional sense. They do not hold royal titles, they are not in the line of succession, they do not perform official engagements on behalf of the sovereign, and they do not receive public status simply because their grandmother married the king. Their connection is personal, not constitutional. That has always placed them in an unusual position. They can be loved privately, included at family occasions, and photographed near royal relatives, without becoming working royals or acquiring an automatic claim to palace life. For King Charles, that private distinction has probably felt natural. He married Camilla after decades of public controversy, and part of their life together has involved creating a blended family that does not behave as though one side must disappear for the other to be accepted. Camilla's children have attended major family moments, and her grandchildren played visible roles during the coronation. Their presence communicated affection and family unity, but it did not create a new royal branch. They were not being prepared for titles or public duties. They were present because the woman being crowned queen was their grandmother. That is an important difference, because ceremonial inclusion can look like institutional promotion when viewers see a photograph without understanding the private relationship behind it. The Christmas gatherings at Sandringham have become central to the current speculation. Camilla's children and grandchildren were associated with the wider family celebrations during the difficult period following the king's cancer diagnosis. Their inclusion was interpreted by some observers as proof that they had been permanently absorbed into the royal inner circle. Then, Tom Parker Bowles confirmed that he and his sister would not spend Christmas at Sandringham in 2025. The absence was immediately transformed online into evidence that William had begun clearing Camilla's relatives away from the future monarchy. Yet Tom's own explanation pointed toward a far less dramatic reason. He described the family arrangement as alternating Christmas plans, with 1 year spent in the royal setting and another spent with different parts of their family. That sounds more like the ordinary negotiation of a blended household than a palace purge. The comparison with Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie also requires care. Their attendance at a royal Christmas does not prove that Camilla's children were deliberately excluded. Beatrice and Eugenie are granddaughters of Queen Elizabeth II, nieces of the king, princesses by birth, and members of the line of succession, even though they are not working royals. Their constitutional and family position is completely different from that of Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. One group being present while another follows separate plans does not automatically reveal a secret ranking imposed by William. Royal gatherings have always changed according to space, health, marriages, children, other relatives, and private arrangements that are never fully explained to the public. That does not mean the future question is imaginary. It means the evidence needs to be separated from the prediction. William has long been associated with the idea of a more focused monarchy, one that relies on a small number of clearly defined working royals rather than a sprawling group of relatives whose public position is difficult to explain. The pressure for clarity is real. Every person seen repeatedly at royal residences can become the subject of questions about security, funding, influence, access, and status. The modern monarchy faces constant scrutiny over who performs public work and who benefits from proximity to the crown. A future king would have strong reasons to keep official roles narrow, even if he maintains warm private relationships with a much wider family. The move by William, Catherine, and their children to Forest Lodge in Windsor Great Park has intensified that discussion. The move was real and publicly confirmed. It provides the Wales family with a larger and more permanent home near the children's school and within the Windsor area. But the leap from a family relocation to the creation of a rival royal court is speculation. Forest Lodge can represent stability, privacy, and a long-term base without becoming a command center from which William removes relatives he dislikes. The Prince of Wales is preparing for the future, but preparation is not the same as secretly exercising the full authority of the sovereign. This is where some versions of the story go too far. King Charles remains the monarch. He continues to carry out public duties, host major events, support charities, and represent the country. A state visit to the United States was formally announced for 2026, and his public schedule has continued despite the health challenges already acknowledged by the palace. William's profile is naturally increasing because he is the heir, but the claim that the transition has already happened in everything except title exaggerates the constitutional reality. Influence can shift gradually inside a family, yet the king still holds the authority of the crown and controls the arrangements of his reign. William can advise, plan, and establish habits that may continue when he becomes king. He cannot simply convert every private royal space into his personal domain while Charles remains sovereign. Windsor itself is not one single household controlled by one individual. It contains royal residences, crown estate property, operational areas, private homes, public spaces, staff facilities, and security zones governed by different arrangements. The idea that Camilla's grandchildren once enjoyed unrestricted access and were suddenly ordered out would require far stronger evidence than anonymous online claims. Royal security does not normally operate on the basis of casual, permanent freedom for non-working relatives. Visits would already be subject to invitations, schedules, household permission, and security procedures. The strongest version of the story is therefore not that William dramatically expelled a young relative. It is that the Wales household is becoming more self-contained, and that William will insist on clearer boundaries between private relatives and public representatives when his reign begins. That may affect Camilla's family, but it would also affect many other people connected to the Windsors. Friends, cousins, former staff, in-laws, godchildren, and non-working relatives may be welcome at private occasions without receiving an official position. A slimmed monarchy is not necessarily a smaller family. It is a smaller group authorized to act in the name of the crown. Camilla's grandchildren have not publicly demanded anything different. By most available accounts, they have remained private and avoided presenting themselves as royals. They have not asked for titles, official residences, public funding, military appointments, or positions on the palace balcony. Tom Parker Bowles has built a career around food writing and broadcasting. Laura Lopes has worked in the art world. Their children have largely grown up outside the daily royal spotlight. Treating them as though they were attempting to establish a rival dynasty creates a conflict that the public evidence does not support. This is important because the grandchildren themselves should not become props in an argument about Diana, Camilla, Charles, and William. They did not create the history that made their grandmother controversial. They did not choose the circumstances of Charles's first marriage or the public pain that followed its collapse. They were born into a family arrangement that already carried decades of emotion. Whatever William privately feels about the past, There is no responsible basis for assuming that he would punish young people for decisions made before they were born. Institutional limits can be applied without personal hostility, and private kindness can exist without constitutional inclusion. William's childhood understandably shapes how observers interpret every interaction involving Camilla. He lived through the breakdown of his parents' marriage, the relentless press coverage surrounding Diana, and the long public argument over Charles and Camilla's relationship. Those experiences cannot simply be erased by polite appearances, yet it is equally dangerous to claim knowledge of William's private motives whenever a rumor appears. He has publicly supported his father's reign and has appeared with the Queen at major events. A relationship can contain history, caution, duty, and cooperation at the same time. It does not have to be either complete affection or secret revenge. The same caution applies to Princess Anne. Her reputation for discipline, hard work, and directness makes her perfect for online storytelling. If she speaks, every sentence is treated as a verdict. If she remains silent, the silence is also turned into a verdict. But silence is not evidence unless there is proof that she was present, understood the alleged decision, had authority to object, and deliberately chose not to do so. None of those steps has been publicly established in the expulsion story. Anne may share William's preference for a hard-working and clearly defined monarchy. That does not mean she silently applauded the removal of Camilla's grandson from Windsor. Anne's real record is powerful enough without inventing private scenes for her. She has spent decades carrying out engagements, supporting organizations, representing the sovereign, and avoiding the type of personal publicity that overwhelms the work. Her approach demonstrates a belief that royal status must be justified through service. It is reasonable to think she would support clear institutional roles. It is not reasonable to turn that general philosophy into confirmation of a specific confrontation that nobody has verified. The difference between analysis and fiction is the evidence connecting the two. The Queen's position also deserves a more careful explanation. Camilla is Queen because she is married to the reigning king. Her children and grandchildren remain her private family, not an additional royal house. When the reign eventually changes, her public role will change as well. But the precise shape of her household, residence, duties, security, and financial arrangements will depend on decisions made at that time. It is too early to present every detail as settled. William may become responsible for the institution, but that does not mean Camilla will lose all dignity, family contact, or access overnight. Modern royal transitions are managed through planning and negotiation, not through the theatrical removal of everyone linked to the previous sovereign. There is also a practical reason William would avoid humiliating Camilla's family. A future monarch who wants to reduce drama would gain nothing from creating a public feud with private citizens who have largely behaved discreetly. A confrontation would generate exactly the confusion and hostile coverage a slimmed monarchy is supposed to prevent. The cleaner approach would be simple. Keep official duties restricted to working royals, keep private events private, and avoid giving non-royal relatives an ambiguous public role. That policy would not require an expulsion. It would require consistent boundaries. Those boundaries may become more visible through future events. Who stands on a palace balcony is an official decision. Who appears in the court circular reflects public royal work. Who receives a formal household position has institutional meaning. Who attends a private lunch, family wedding, birthday, or Christmas gathering does not necessarily reveal the future of the monarchy. Royal coverage often confuses these categories because photographs are more dramatic than administrative rules. A child seen near the king can be labeled a new palace favorite one week and an exile the next, even when no official status has changed at all. The coronation demonstrated this difference clearly. Camilla's grandsons served as pages of honor, a personal and ceremonial role connected to their grandmother. Their involvement was historically notable because it reflected the reality of a blended family. But the ceremony did not place them in the succession or assign them permanent royal duties. Once the event ended, they returned to private life. It is entirely possible for Charles and Camilla to value that moment, while William later maintains a more restricted public structure. There is no contradiction between honoring the Queen's family at her coronation and declining to transform them into permanent representatives of the Crown. The Christmas story should be understood in the same way. One invitation can express personal warmth without establishing a lifelong entitlement. One absence can reflect family scheduling without proving banishment. Tom's comments about alternating years weaken the argument that his family was singled out by William. If the public begins with the conclusion that a purge has occurred, every ordinary absence becomes evidence. But a fair analysis begins with the known explanation and asks whether reliable reporting contradicts it. At present, the dramatic claim is much stronger than the public proof behind it. That does not make the subject unimportant. In fact, removing the unsupported confrontation reveals a more significant story. Charles and William appear to have different instincts about monarchy. Charles has often emphasized reconciliation, inclusion, faith, community, and the emotional value of bringing complicated relationships into the same space. William appears more interested in impact, measurable projects, a smaller operational team, and clear boundaries between family life and official duty. Both approaches are responses to the pressures of their generations. Charles waited most of his life to become king and may value the freedom to shape a personal reign. William has watched public patience with royal ambiguity become far less forgiving. The cost of monarchy is scrutinized. Security is scrutinized. Housing is scrutinized. Travel, staffing, clothing, friendships, and every use of a royal residence are scrutinized. William knows that the future institution will have to explain itself more clearly than previous generations did. A broad collection of relatives enjoying visible access without official responsibilities would invite criticism, even if the relationships were entirely innocent. His solution may be to reduce public ambiguity while preserving private family connections away from cameras. That approach would not only apply to Camilla's descendants, it could also affect William's cousins, the partners of extended relatives, and eventually his own children if they choose lives outside royal service. George is directly in line to the throne, but Charlotte and Louis may one day face decisions about how much official responsibility they want. A rule based on work and constitutional relevance would need to operate consistently. William could not credibly exclude one set of non-working relatives while expanding privileges for another, simply because the blood relationship was closer to him. The legitimacy of a slimmed monarchy would depend on transparent principles rather than personal preference. Catherine's family offers an obvious comparison, but it must also be handled carefully. The Middletons are close to the Wales family and have provided private support, particularly during difficult periods. They are not working royals, do not represent the sovereign, and do not receive royal titles because their daughter married the heir. Their private closeness does not automatically give them institutional authority. If William wants clear boundaries for Camilla's family, the same distinction would need to protect the monarchy from confusion around his own in-laws. Private support can be essential without becoming a public office. That consistency may be the real test of William's future. A modern monarchy cannot depend entirely on whether the sovereign personally likes someone. It needs rules strong enough to survive changing relationships. People who carry out official duties should have defined responsibilities. People who are private relatives should be treated with respect, but should not be presented as representatives of the state. Royal residences should not become symbols of social rank handed out through personal favor. Invitations should remain invitations, not permanent constitutional promises. Camilla may understand this better than the most dramatic reports suggest. She spent years navigating royal rules before becoming queen and knows how quickly public sympathy can change. Her children have generally avoided demanding a place inside the institution. Protecting them may not mean securing permanent access to Windsor. It may mean keeping them outside the machinery that turns every movement into news. A private family life could be safer and more stable than an ambiguous, semi-royal position that exposes the grandchildren to scrutiny without giving them a meaningful role. The public reaction supports that possibility. There was no major demand that Camilla's children must attend every Sandringham Christmas. Most people appear to understand that they have their own households, former partners, children, and traditions. Their absence did not create a constitutional crisis because the public does not view them as required members of the royal operation. That is not necessarily rejection. It may be evidence that the boundary is already understood. They can matter deeply to Camilla without becoming necessary to the monarchy. The more sensational claim also risks misrepresenting William's power. As heir, he has major influence, but presenting every palace decision as his personal order creates a mythology in which Charles has already become a ceremonial spectator. The king's continued schedule does not support that picture. Charles may delegate more duties and consult William on long-term planning, especially while managing his health, but delegation is not abdication. Father and son can disagree over style while still working within the same reign. Future planning is normal. A secret takeover is a much larger claim that requires much stronger evidence. It is possible that palace staff are already preparing for different expectations under William. Institutions plan for succession long before it occurs. Households review staffing, residences, patronages, finances, technology, security, and public strategy. But preparation does not prove that a specific grandson was expelled or that Anne witnessed it.